Hey, welcome everyone to GEO555 Monday nights, as you obviously know. We'll do an introduction, talk about the course tonight. We only meet 13, 14 times, so I will start a little bit with lecture material, but I think there's a law that you're not supposed to keep students the first class the whole time. I learned that when I was here. So we'll adhere to that policy. First introductions, my name is Greg Caniglio. I am a graduate of the geography department from way too long ago. 1995 didn't seem like that long ago for a while, but now that's a long time ago. So I had graduated with an MS in GIS, like many of you are going for back 20 years ago. I have spent most of that time doing local consulting, assisting companies with GIS. In the meantime, 12 of those years with Ecology and Environment, which is a large GIS firm in Lancaster, New York. We have a group of 10 GIS analysts that spend 40 hours a week or more doing GIS. So that's my background. As I said, I'm also a graduate at this department, and I've been teaching various GIS courses at this department for 10 years now, and that scares me more because it seems like I just started doing this. We started doing GIS for VBA back in 2005 on ArcView 9, and things have come a long way. I will be teaching this class Monday nights, and then tomorrow night I'll do Intro to GIS, GEO481, if anyone is in that class. In this summer, like we did last summer, we'll have a summer session in WebGIS development. I think it's from roughly Memorial Day to the 4th of July, if anyone is interested in that. I think it might be Monday and Wednesday nights, like last summer, but it may not be finalized yet. So I'll keep people posted if they're interested in that course. I can share the syllabus, talk about what we learned in that course. The courses in the jail, obviously, there's not an associated lab. Lecture and lab are together in this session. A couple other things. I do utilize UB Learns, and I've already opened the UB Learns site where we have the syllabus, which I'll go over in a second. And then I've loaded the first couple lectures. I do try to, for people that want to play ahead, sometimes you have other deadlines you want to work around. I try to load as much content ahead of time as possible. Once in a while I have a student that finishes in February and they go through all the content. It's fine with me. It's one less person to grade at the end of the semester. No pressure to do that. You can wait until the end as well. As I mentioned briefly, a new thing that I'll be doing this semester is I know UB has the iTunes program. Has anyone taken a class where the professor's done that? Or is that a relatively unused thing? Okay, well, we'll try it out, see how it goes. Occasionally I may have to miss a class. I travel around for work from time to time, and I will let you know. The class of February 9th, there's a good chance I won't be here. But what I'm going to use iTunes for is I will record a lecture anyway, and then you can watch the lecture at your leisure from the UB iTunes site. So even if I'm not here, we'll have a lecture every week so that we don't get behind because I'm unable to make it. I guess I could do that also if weather becomes a problem, as it does from time to time. We even missed a class once because the Sabres had a playoff game. That tells you how long ago that was. That wasn't any time recently. But enough people didn't show up to class, there was really no point. And so now the class could go on, Sabres or not. That's not going to be an issue this year or any time in the foreseeable future. So I will hopefully shortly add additional classes and the lectures. These are PowerPoint slides. The lectures will be PowerPoint based. Very important, especially at the end of the semester. Don't let me forget to turn that back on so we don't burn UB down. I turn it off because it's really loud, and sometimes some people have a hard time hearing me. But I'll turn it back on at the end of the class. It's more of an issue when the weather's warmer. Are there any questions? I'll go over what we're going to learn in the class in general, and specifically we'll go over grading, course expectations. I'll start a primer introduction to programming, and then we'll end and reconvene next Monday. So as you see, I was saying Monday, I think it's supposed to be 7 to 9:40. I'll do my best to never keep you until 9:40. Obviously, we don't want to end too early. There's a lot to cover. My office hours will be informally, well, not informally before class. I'll try to get here by 6. and I'll hang out either in, I didn't write that down, in 133 down the hall here, or I may just come down here. Sometimes it's easier to go over a problem with the student right at a desktop. So find me before class, in 133 or here. And we can always stay after as well. Sometimes I'm not usually here during the business day, but I can sometimes arrange that if it's difficult for you to get here before class. I can try to be flexible. And the easiest way to get a hold of me is my email account. You can email my UB account, of course. But this is my work account. And that's tied to my iPhone, so if you have a question, I might see that quicker. My problem is turning in labs. Sometimes our company filters access databases or zip files, so you may want to send labs to the UB account and not that one. But that's the quickest way. I'll usually, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on the situation, I'll see the email immediately. So you can contact me there. I think that's on the syllabus as well. What do we require for this? Well, everyone's here, but I mentioned that just in case someone let you in, and the problem that I had tonight. Make sure that your card works. Joe Murray in the, Scott, do you know where he is? In Wilkinson 105. Trying to think of the best way to describe it. You know where you come in, right where we were waiting to be let in. If you go across the hall, the geography department headquarters is across the hall from where you come in this hallway, and Joe can help alleviate that problem. He contacts the university, and this hallway is more restricted. Not any UB student can come down here, so he's got a list that he gives to facilities to list who should be in there. So Joe Murray could help you out. I'll make a note even to contact him about that problem for you. This is not, hopefully, has everyone been able to log in? Try, if you wouldn't mind, try to log in now, because that's another problem for Joe. If you don't have a login on these machines, I don't think it'll be a problem, but try just to make sure. Because what we'll set up is an account for where you can keep your files for this class. Segue into that right now. Some good news. You were here last summer. Well, I've heard these appear to be new machines. This is good. The old machines were getting, I'm not sure we had new ones since I started. They were getting really slow and buggy. So I think that's a good thing that we have brand new machines this semester. We also have, for those of you that understand, have used RTS a little more, it's version 10.2, so it's been updated as well. So your location will be here. It used to be the H drive, now apparently is the M drive. And then you'll see a geography folder. Again, you don't need to know this for tonight, but just a heads up. And there's a GEO555 folder. Oh, they have all my stuff from before. I'll clean that out. But they have, I don't think this is active yet. No, it's not. There's a student folder. These are last spring students. So sometime between now and next Monday, Clarence is going to delete these folders, and we'll set up a new folder with your name if you're enrolled in this Geography GEO555 student folder. So that's where you can keep your assignments and so on. I'll also distribute various things like data sets in this folder, and we'll go over that as during the semester on an as needed basis. For those of you that want to do this outside of the lab, there's no need to, but sometimes students like to work on the labs from home. We have evaluation discs available in the department. I don't have any with me right now. ESRI has always been good to students. This software, Ask E&E, the software costs 5 or 6 figures a year for E&E, but you guys get a 1-year free copy if you need it. And when that box comes in from Esri, I'll bring it in. Don't take one if you already have many of you may already have access or are planning on just working in the lab. If you don't need it, don't take it, but I have plenty if you want to install it on a home computer or your own computer. 10.2, yeah. Joe has a few, and about a week ago or so, ordered 60 more from Mr. I to cover this course and 481. And it usually takes a week, so they should come in hopefully by next Monday if anyone wants that.
You know if they have them in the library?
Yeah, Torsten said that you can now get them in the library for free too. If
They give you, it's all online, they just give you a code.
Oh,
You go to Ezra's website.
okay. That's a. Do you know? He thought it might just be for grad students. Do you know if that's
It's for everybody.
for everyone? Okay.
They take your name and number.
Okay.
Number down so you can get more.
Okay. Is it Cape Ann Library or in Cape Ann? I just found this out tonight too. You can also just go get the software for free at Cape Ann. Then give your student ID. I didn't know that. I think that maybe that's new. I was unaware of that before now, which is good. I mean, that software is worth a lot of money, and you get a free copy for a year. It does. I see some Apples. It doesn't work on Apple computers, but if you run an emulator in Apple to run Windows, it'll run just fine. It's PC only.
Do you have any access to Visual?
You can download Visual Studio also, and I'll get to that. Yeah, it is a pain. It takes forever. I was installed. I swear it took like 6 hours to install. I'm not exaggerating. We're using, and I think we'll talk about this tonight or next Monday. We're using Visual Studio to program in this class. You all get a free copy of that as well as on the UB software site. And maybe I'll go over DreamSpark, I think is what it's called. Go over the wonderful way and you get that. But that's a tremendous value. That would be $1,000 or more to the outside world. So that I wouldn't, if you're interested in programming, sometimes people after the class say, you know what, I don't want to do this ever again, and that's fine. If you're interested in programming, it's not a bad idea to download that before you leave UB, because it's such a valuable resource. I told the department they're going to have to go to Visual Studio 2012 next year. You guys are safe, because I'm assuming we'll be at 10.3 by next year, and 10.3 doesn't go sooner than 2012. We'll talk about what that all means. So we went over the student drives. Printing, there's an account so you can print. It's not a big deal if you can hand in stuff just by emailing me Word files and code if you don't want to print. But I'll accept it either way. So our course description. Desktop GIS has become a very hot topic. We have people that do it full time at my work. And there we go. So this course provides, as you see, an introduction to both these areas. We'll learn how to basically take ArcMap and write your own buttons. How many of you have used ArcMap? How many of you are familiar with ArcMap? Okay, that's okay. I mean, you don't need to know it in and out. We'll go over it as the semester goes on. That's okay. But what we'll teach you how to do is we'll learn the C# programming language, which is not a GIS-only programming language. All sorts of developers use C# to develop many different types of solutions. But we're going to learn how to use that to build what are called ArcObjects add-ins, and that'll make more sense than it does now as we go on. That lets you put your own buttons. So you'll write a tool to execute your own button in ArcMap that is a program written just for your needs. The course focused specifically on this website. You can find it lists other geography courses, and these are the three things we'll focus on. I said using Visual Studio 2010 and C#. That might be a problem on DreamSpark. I don't know if you can get 2010 anymore. That's a potential issue. But it's 20.
I think you should.
You can. You might have to dig. It's on there. Okay, good. That's good news. It's still 2010 on here. And ArcObjects is the programming language specific to GIS that lets you build your own buttons and menus. And specifically, we'll be developing these things called add-ins. At the end of the course, you'll have several techniques to help you apply to build your own GIS buttons onto ArcMap. And why would you do this? Typically, you're streamlining a workflow. If there's something that you do repetitively that takes 3 different button clicks and then going to another menu and manually changing 3 things, write a button that does everything at once to help streamline process. In a nutshell, that's usually why you would develop a program. Here's a tentative class schedule, subject to change. Sometimes it's hard to predict. Sometimes we go ahead of the schedule. Sometimes we fall a little behind and catch up. It depends. Every semester is different. We'll start with the introduction tonight. Start talking about object-oriented programming. That's the specific type of programming we do in here. To February 9th, at this point, looks like it'll be an iTunes lecture. I'll put all lectures on iTunes, even if I'm here. I'm recording right now, if it's working. But then we'll mostly learn about C# and programming in general up until the end of February. And then starting early March, we'll then learn how to specifically apply programming concepts to GIS. So we start out with, we don't assume much programming knowledge. This is for beginners. So if you haven't programmed much, I should ask that question too. How many people have a background in programming at all, even a little bit? Okay, it's most people. That's good. But if you didn't raise your hand, that's okay. We start out very basic, and then around here we get into where you would start applying specifically to GIS. And then we spend most of it's a little vague, I know, spend most of the time working with add-ins in the course from March on. Spring break, I'm surprised it's a little later than it usually is. We won't meet then. You'll also notice, and this is subject to change. I tried this for the first time last spring, and it worked well. And I'll get to grade. I'm pretty lenient about due dates. I'll get to that in a minute. But sometimes what happens is we go through the whole course, and for some people, people would be playing catch up at the end, especially if people are struggling a little more. So what I introduced last spring, it seemed to work, is we will intersperse 3 class sessions where there's no lecture. I'll just show up and you come and I can sit with you and help you finish lab work or your project. And I used to do that all at the end. And I guess I still have 2 at the end, but I worked one, and I think I actually moved this around and had another one in here somewhere. So that you can kind of help get caught up. Not wait till the end to say, oh no, what do I do? So tentatively, but that tends to move around. It also builds in a little bit of flex time if we need more time for the lectures than I think. So basically we have 3 open class periods where I'll be here, and we'll work together on getting your labs done. May 5th is the last class this semester, I think. Here's the grading. There's 2 quizzes. Last year I gave them out as one package. The 2 quizzes based in one. The first quiz reinforces basic these are not tricky at all. I'm not trying to trick up anyone. It's basic concepts, high-level questions about programming and the things we learn. They're take-home. You can review your notes. I usually give a couple weeks to do them. So it's not hard. And then one of the things I'll talk about maybe a couple weeks from now is how in programming there's so many different things. There's no way no one will ever remember every object, every class. So one of the most important things I think we learn is how to use help. Where to look online to figure out something if you don't remember the answer. So we'll spend the better part of a class just talking about using ESRI's help system. And the second quiz, I will ask you questions that you could only get the answer to by using the help. Unless you really are a genius at memorizing everything. I'll ask questions like, well, how many different types of methods does this class have? Things like that you would get the answer by using the help. And that's the second quiz. As I said, I probably will do that again. I'll hand them out together as one package and give you 2 or 3 weeks to work on them. And together they'll comprise 40% of the grade. The lab assignments are 30%. There'll be 6 or 7 labs. I'll let you pick 5. And I'll put them on UB Learns relatively soon. They're follow along. And then at the end of the lab, you will show me your work and turn in your code. You'll say you finish lab 2, at the end of the class raise your hand and say I want to show you lab 2. I'll look at it with you, make sure that it's working, and then have you just print out the code and hand it in. That's an easy grade too. I mean, as long as you complete the work, you'll get the full credit. And then the last 30%, adds up right, is final project. I call it like a lab plus, where these labs are things I put together asking you to do. For a final project, I'll ask you to come up with an idea of your own code that you might want to write. and you'll propose it to send me an email or a letter saying this is what I want to do. I'll say okay or no, and then it's more of a self-directed lab. I don't want, sometimes that's hard, especially if you haven't programmed much. I mean, you don't really know what you want to do yet, so we don't think about this till later in the semester. Maybe as we get into labs, that'll give you ideas. I also try, we do a lot of different things, maybe too many sometimes at work, so I can share a lot of ideas of different code that we've written to help people, help coworkers do their get products faster, and that might help as well. So there's, I don't think, unless some of you may already have an idea, and that's fine too, but there's probably no need to worry about this until we get further into the semester. Usually people will say, no, I don't know what I'm going to do, but as we talk and talk, something might come to you. One thing, if you're working on a thesis project or something like that, a lot of students do that, and I think that's great. I was surprised to learn that some professors don't allow that. You can't use something that you're using in another class, and I would actually encourage it. I mean, the whole point of programming is to help develop something that helps you. So if it ends up being a piece of code that helps you in another class or helps you with your project, I think that's fantastic, and I would encourage it. It also helps you with an idea if you're struggling to find ideas. I will accept, I try to accept material as late as possible, and as we get closer, I'll tell you. I have a deadline. There's a date by which UB requires grades, and it's usually in mid-May. I'm not encouraging that, but I try to be flexible. I know people have busy schedules, and you might have something going on in April where you want to postpone handing stuff in. So I'm usually pretty flexible, but it's still not a winning strategy usually to wait and try to do anything at the end. Even though I might be flexible, I might bug you about that a little bit because students might fall too far behind. But I also understand that everyone has a different schedule. I try to be accommodating as possible. It's a grad class. Usually that works out fine. But I'll let you know when that drop. I need to have all the material by the drop dead date, for sure. But I certainly encourage handing stuff in early so that I'm not swamped with a bunch of things on May 14th or whenever the due date is. That's just when the weather's turning nice. I don't want to. It's nice that this class is smaller. That helps me try to give as much one-on-one help as possible. It makes that a little more possible. If there are 50 people in here, I don't think I could do something like that. I think it'd have to be stricter. And I'll try to announce the quiz dates as soon as possible. It's usually somewhere around spring break. I try not to, once I felt that I gave it out the week before spring break and it was due the week after. I'll try not to do that, or at least there'll be another week in there. I felt guilty about that. I probably shouldn't. Cancel that. I don't take attendance. I think everyone knows by now it's good to attend. I also know that sometimes stuff comes up and you can't make it, and that's cool. So do your best to be here as much as possible. I think I may have discussed most of this already. Labs are hands-on exercises. The labs would typically involve something that we had recently talked about in a lecture. If we learn how to change a layer's legend in a lecture, and that's lab 3, lab 3 will come along after that and then reinforce the concept. Should always make time available before and after, other times on request. Might be a little trickier because of the nature of my business. We're usually pretty busy. They keep us busy there. Completing labs using GL machines is not mandatory. I said if you have access to the software, students will bring in your laptop and that's fine. But it might be easier if you don't have access to this software. Although more and more that's become available through the generosity of SUNY. ESRI throws so much free software. When I was a student, they gave the department over $1 million of free software. What a waste of money. It wasn't really, because all of us graduated knowing ESRI software, and then people like me get a job at E&E and say, E&E, this is the software you should use. I think they made their investment back by now. Also, a side note, for those of you interested in a GIS career, which I assume is many of you, ESRI comes and does interviews. Does everyone know if they're planning to do that this semester?
March 3rd.
March 3rd, okay. if you have any, I mean, I would recommend that, even if it's just getting used to having an interview. A lot of people have started a very successful GIS career, with ESRI. And as someone that helps E&E with hiring GIS staff, it always looks good when ESRI comes in on the resume. You found that there's other opportunities like assisting with their user conference in the summer that they have in San Diego, internship possibilities. So I think that's worth considering is interviewing with them or keeping up on that possibility when they come on March 3rd. As I said, these are the two main softwares really all will use. ArcGIS Desktop 10.2 and Microsoft Visual Studio 2010. Let's see how that opens up. If you've used 10.1, 10.2 is very similar. I won't have to make that many changes, if any, to my labs from 10.1 to make them ready for you. What I did here to start ArcMap, I just went to start all programs, ArcGIS, ArcMap. There's different products for those of you not as familiar with ArcGIS Desktop. There's an ArcCatalog, which is like a file management system. ArcGlobe and ArcScene are 3D tools. We have a limited time here, so we're going to focus on ArcMap. That's what 90% of my time at E&E is ArcMap anyway, so I think that gives you the most tools that you need. But what I'm talking about here's the ArcMap interface. You will learn how to add your own button to do something specific to what you want it to. And we'll get much more into that. Wow, it's got SQL Server. Microsoft Visual Studio is the programming language or programming environment that we'll use. Again, that is not specific to GIS, so if you have aspirations to program beyond GIS, hopefully this will be of use of you that way too. And I don't want to, I'll just open it to show it to you. I didn't want to get into that too much tonight. Visual C#. And maybe that's enough for tonight. I keep forgetting to switch back and forth. So a history of custom developing with ArcGIS. This is my software. And it's sad that I can write more of this and remember it. It goes on. But a lot has changed since I started here. When I started, everyone that did GIS was a programmer. We had this language called ArcMacro language, and there was this product called ArcInfo Workstation. There was none of this nice ArcMap with the buttons and menus. If you wanted to do GIS, you were coding GIS. It's not unlike, when I started here, there wasn't any Windows software either. I don't know if that's probably hard for people now to imagine. You're used to booting your PC and the Windows come up. You used to just come up with a DOS prompt. Do you know what a DOS prompt is? I'm not that old yet. I'm getting there. So even on Windows, anything you did was programming. So you might still see some people floating around the apartment that write in this ArcMacro language. Around 1994, when I was a student here, ESRI came up with their first, what we call user interface. By user interface, I mean there's buttons and menus like you're used to seeing. It was called ArcView 1. ArcView 1's gone through a whole bunch of progressions. It's become ArcGIS 10.2 today. I got a teaching assistant to be the JL assistant that year, and we would give all these seminars and no one cared, like how to use Photoshop, and no one would ever show up. But I remember 45 people showed up when this ArcView 1, because everyone knew, I think even then knew, okay, this is going to be big, and it was. Around the mid-90s too was the first time, when it first came up, you couldn't write code like we're doing now. It was what it was, and you could use it the way it came by default or not. In the mid-90s, it started with a language called Avenue. ArcGIS in its present form actually started with, they call it ArcGIS 8 in 1999, which is, even that's getting to be a long time ago. It hasn't changed a whole lot even since 1999. We used VBA instead of C#, and I'll get into that a little bit. But the ARC objects that we'll use are the same as they were in 1999. That's actually a bit of a problem, and ESRI is coming out with a new software package called ArcGIS Professional. You heard all about it in San Diego. It'll eventually replace ArcMap. And maybe sometime I'll show that. There was some scary talk about that happening soon, which frightened me, because a company like ours, we use ArcMap all the time. But just talked to ESRI this week, and they backed off that a little bit. ArcMap is such a popular product that it's probably going to be at least 5 years before it goes away. So that's in response to the fact that this really hasn't changed much since 1999. Even at 10.2, it's pretty similar. So I'll get into more detail. I don't want to. Basically, what this means is because it's COM compliant, I'll get into that more later. It just means you can use a lot of different languages to write the same thing. We're going to use C# in this class because I find a lot of demand for C#, so I think that equips you with the most need. But you could use Visual Basic, you could use a variety of other products. VBA was the application, the programming language we used up until 2011. And now Microsoft's those were also used to develop macros. Like if you wrote those in Excel, Microsoft's doing away with that, so ArcGIS is doing away with that as well. Another scripting language that's becoming more and more popular, and I would recommend getting into it, is Python. Python lets you build geoprocessing tasks. It's a whole different thing that we're doing here. You don't add buttons like we are here, but if you have a task that clips data, analyzes it, and so on, you can write Python scripts to do that. And GEO555 usually offers that course. Does anyone know if that's going on this spring?
Thursday night.
Thursday nights, okay. Dr. Bittner usually, is that still the case? Teaches that Thursday night, so that's not a bad thing to look up. If maybe too late for this year, but maybe next year it's worth considering that as well. Python and ArcObjects are not mutually exclusive. I think it's to your benefit to know both. So I wouldn't say, oh, you took this course, you don't need that one, or vice versa. I think it helps for you to have experience in both. And then 655 is a good place to learn Python. Almost done. I said it'd be short. We'll start by talking a little bit of basics of object-oriented programming. The code that we'll develop in is in a type of programming language called object-oriented. Basically, it means that everything is built off classes of objects, and how we define those classes of objects is this ARC objects that we talk about. ARC objects are GIS objects. So we'll introduce that a little bit tonight, and then we'll stop and we'll reconvene on a week from now on February 3rd. So I said object-oriented programming language. C# is one of them. Here's a definition I found somewhere. A software design method that models the characteristics of abstract or real objects into classes and objects. So any functionality, any information in GIS is stored on these objects. And then we group objects into classes of things. It's a categorization method. In other words, I mean, each one of you is a person, your own object, so to speak. We might categorize you into a class called human. Or you might be all categorized, all of us, including me, would be in that class. If there's another class called you'd be student, all of you would be categorized in that class, but I wouldn't. So one object could be different types of classes, and we'll talk a lot about the complications that arises from that. Or there could be a class called you be geography student. Some of you would fall in, some of you objects, that sounds so impersonal, would fall into that class, some wouldn't. GIS has the same challenges, and we'll talk about that through most of the course. The example I pictured here is the object bird, or you could have a class called bird. That's really hard to see, there's a goose there. That specific goose is an object or an instance of bird. So even in language, when you use the word bird, it's a way in linguistics to categorize like objects into one class, like bird or human. And you can even see here, it's not on the slide, you have the same challenges. There could be a class called goose, a class called bird, a class called animal, and so on. All of which this object there would belong to. Any questions? And then when we get to interfaces midway through the semester, it gets even more fun. So here, as I said, a class is a blueprint or a template for creating or referencing specific objects in code. So just another example of the same thing, like my UB student example here. You might have a class of object called a crow. Everything in the world is either a crow or not. You know, none of the objects in this room are of class crow. So if there are, as you'll see momentarily, there's things called methods. Those are actions the crow can take, or properties. It's information about the crow. We couldn't use any of those commands on any object in this room because you wouldn't fit the class crow. So here, this is supposed to be abstract, indicating the abstract class crow, and that's an actual object. That object would fall into the class crow. To make at least a little sense, it gets clearer. You know, this can be hard at first, but you know, when I first took this, at some point the light goes on. It's not always right away. So here I've got my weird bird example again, but I also have a GIS example. There's a class of object called map that references a data frame in ArcGIS. So I haven't added any data to this, but this layers is a data frame that stores a collection of GIS layers. You can access that object and do things to it or find out about it just like we could about the crow or the goose or the UB student. So data frame or map has properties about it, we'll get to that in a second, or it has things you can do to it. And here's the properties. Properties are information about a class. There's specific properties for each specific type of object. And obviously the properties are defined by whoever develops the programming language. So someone at ESRI set up all the different classes that we use, and they define what properties would be settable. So here on the class bird, these are properties, and the nomenclature is the object dot and then the property. So there are a couple obvious properties that come to mind on a bird. You know, what species is it? So I have a property here called type. You might have a property called length. You know, how big is the bird? A property can have a subproperty. So this bird also owns another class called wing. The bird has two wings. In the case of a UB student, you could have properties, your GPA, your level, are you a sophomore, freshman, junior? And you can see where those properties apply specifically to UB student. It doesn't make sense to get the GPA of the goose. That property wouldn't apply to the bird at all, but that property would be appropriate on the class UB student. And then down here, we have a GIS example of a class you'll work with a lot, a layer. That's a GIS layer of roads, parcels, buildings, and so on. Here's some example properties I have. In GIS, you can tell a layer not to draw if you zoom out too far. That's a property called maximum scale. And in this pseudo example here, I've set the maximum scale of the pavement GIS layer at 200,000. So after doing that, you know, if you zoom out behind more than 200,000, you're not going to see the layer. Sometimes people do that if the layer is too busy. If it's a layer of every street in the country and you zoom out to the whole country, it's not going to make any sense. You'll just see a blob. So you might use this to turn the layer off at that scale. A layer has a name. So here I've set the name property on the layer to, you know, region 4 pavement. Just like here where a property on a class can be, an object can be another property or another class, like the wing and the bird. My example here is the layer can have another kind of a property spatial reference, which is the projection, the Western New York State Plane, Universal Transverse Mercator. So that's an example of a property in GIS having a property that ends up being a different class. We'll talk a lot about those two differences. There's immutable properties and mutable properties. We'll save that for a couple weeks, so that discussion. Any questions so far? So those are as I said, those are properties, information about the object. You can also perform an action on the object, and that's called a method. So and the nomenclature is the same, the object dot method. So in this example, two actions I can issue on the bird, fly or sing. Those are examples of two methods we might have on our bird class. Or you could use the class to access a subclass. Remember that the bird had classes called wings that belong to my bird.wing flap. And in GIS, on a map, if there's selected objects, there's a command called clear selection. If you think about, if you've ever done that in ArcMap, that's an action you can issue on ArcMap. Or another action is you could add a new layer. If I go in and click this button, I'm sure you've done this, or maybe not, that's okay. I've gone in and added, I've added a new layer to the data frame. That is analogous to that commit. So I've performed an action on the map. And doing this in code is the same thing. Map.add layer. This is the first time we've seen this. See this in parentheses. Sometimes it's not good enough to just say the method. You need more detail. And that's called an argument. So clear selection, simple. You don't need to know anything else, just clear the selection. But if I'm telling the map add a layer, logically it would follow, it needs to know what layer. And that what layer is provided in parentheses in argument. Some methods have a specific number of arguments that need to be provided. You'll say there's a class UB registrar, and it's the end of the semester, and they're going to issue, or a UB teacher, at the end of the semester I give a grade to each of you. I can't say, issue grade to Willard without saying what. There's an obvious argument that needs to be passed. Well, what's the grade? That would be the argument. Issue grade A. So that would be, an argument is when you're working with a method and you need to provide more information. Does that make sense? Good. And here's some other examples here. The arguments may be require a specific type of property itself. So if my method is issue grade to Willard, I'm not going to provide, the Buffalo Sabres one lost record. I'd be providing an object that doesn't make sense in the context of the method. If it's A, B, C, D, F, that does apply. Does that make sense? So often, the argument needs to be a certain type of thing in most cases, or it's not going to make any sense. So here, this is a weird slide, I think, but the Falcon has a method eat, and the argument that I provide has to be animal, because a falcon is a carnivore. A goldfinch, also, that's not really a goldfinch, also has a method eat, but I couldn't provide mouse. A goldfinch isn't a carnivore, it eats seeds. So in some cases, even though the method is the same, depending on the class, the type of argument that it takes might differ. Here, even though both birds have an eat method, the type of argument to be passed is the same. I could say issue grade to Willard and it's A, B, C, D, F. The registrar, though, will also issue a GPA at the end of the semester. And the GPA is a different format. It's going to come as a decimal number, 4.0, I assume. So that's another case where there's a different format, even though it's a similar method. Make sense? And then the third thing, and we'll talk about our events. An event is something that triggers the object to do something. And it's usually, not always, it's often triggered by a click when we're talking about GIS or talk about software. Action, and I wrote here, actions are to occur when an event is triggered for an object. I'll show, actually I'll show an example and then we'll be done. And we'll talk a lot more about events, because in terms of programming software, events are usually clicks or actions on your user interface. So when I did this where I clicked that button and it came up with a dialog asking me to add data, that clicking the button was an event that caused something to happen. Think about it. I clicked the button, something happened. A menu came up. Seems like a minor thing, but that's actually an important point in object-oriented programming. And it's not limited to just desktop software. I mean, if you go to even on a web browser on the internet, here's the UB page. I'm interested in life at UB. See, I click life at UB, something happened. See, it went to a different page. That is a click event. So we will work a lot with events. You can see where it'd be very important for a web developer to build events into a web page, and very important for you if you're going to build a new button. The event triggers something to happen. So that's the third main kind of basic thing that we'll learn about object-oriented programming. We have properties, information about a class, methods, action, the class does something. An event is something that triggers a response, like the button click or clicking a feature. I click the eye tool, touch the map, it's going to come up and tell me what state I clicked. That's another type of event that interacts with the map. Does everyone, at least, I think the most, other than the course particulars, grading and so on, the most important takeaway from tonight is the properties, methods, and events. You think you have a good handle on that? Great. I promised I wouldn't keep you the whole time. It's 8 o'clock. We're done for tonight, I think. If you have any questions, I'm here. I said make sure you can get in if someone let you in.